the e-commerce data input oftentimes comes out of a little bit of laziness and poor understanding because it's set up by folks who don't really understand the operational impact. So by way of a simple example, they go and they put all kinds of information into the description. Yes, it's a very SKU-oriented thinking. Yes, clearly this part is blue, it's red. But truth be told, the definition of what the SKU actually is in the bill of material and the manufacturing instructions. It has nothing to do with the description.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our number one priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. Utilizing software in a siloed department is super easy, but as your enterprise grows, you will require cross-functional collaboration across departments. You will have systems that share common data such as inventory or parts, customers, and vendors. Your architecture may contain ERP, e-commerce, WMS, MES, and P2P systems. Each of them is equally important, which may be dictated by the needs of each department. If you don't have a clearly defined source of authority for each master data, you will have significant challenges correlating the datasets. But what exactly is the source of authority and why it matters for enterprise architecture and to integrate multiple business applications? In today's episode, we invited a panel of cross-functional experts for a live interview on LinkedIn who brings significant expertise to discuss the single source of truth and why it matters. We covered many grounds, including identifying the process and data owners for each dataset and the implications of having multiple and uncontrolled source of truth. Finally, we discussed the best practices in creating the policies and procedures to develop governance frameworks that will enable the controlled source of truth across applications in your enterprise architecture. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hello, welcome everyone to today's show. And today we have a very exciting topic, and that is going to be single source of truth when you are going to be utilizing multiple business applications. And if you are not familiar with what single source of truth is, that is going to be the source of record in your system that you need to maintain. Otherwise, you are going to get a lot of issues in your enterprise architecture. So we are going to start with their intros. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, Sam. Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Chris Carradini. I'm the CEO and owner of Turnkey Technologies. We've been implementing ERP and CRM solutions for the past 27 plus years. So here to share some of the expertise on single source of truth.
And your expertise is going to be super relevant, Chris, just because, the majority of the implementations that you have done, there are always going to be multiple systems. So thank you so much for being here.
Glad to be here.
Okay, Chuck, can I move to you next for your intro?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Sam. It's a pleasure to be here. My name's Chuck Coxhead. I'm with ProCensus. Basically, I create warehouse superheroes. We apply mobile and wearable technology to warehouse workers so that they can most effectively interface with their warehouse management systems.
And today's session is going to be fun, Chuck, because we have a clear division in the panel, okay? We have 2 WMS guys and we have 2 ERP guys, so it's going to be so much fun. Thank you so much for being here, Chuck. Okay, Andy, can I move to you next?
Sure. My name is Andy Pratico. I've been in the ERP business, as Sam mentioned, for about 40 years. So I was a pretty young fellow when I first started. I used to have hair back in those days. I've also written a book. It's published on Amazon that teaches people how to uncover the truth about ERP software. And that's me.
Okay, amazing. And your background is going to be super handy. Andy, and I don't know,
super handy, Andy.
Andy, exactly. Right? Okay, because of your Infor background and obviously the implementations that you are involved with, there are always going to be multiple business systems. Thank you so much for being here, Andy. All right, Jeff. So you are joining for the first time. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Sam, and great to be here. My name is Jeff Lem. I'm the president and CEO and founder of Portable Intelligence. We specialize in warehouse management systems for manufacturers, and I too have recently written a book about your warehouse is not your fridge, and happy to be here and share some of my thoughts and experiences that I've gained over the last 25 plus years. Thank you.
Okay, amazing. And this is the part I like about this panel. We have two book authors in the panel. So Andy has a very popular book, and obviously, Jeff, you are extremely popular as well in the supply chain and warehouse community. So this is going to be super insightful. I'm so excited about this session. Thank you so much for being here, Jeff. All right. So we are going to dig right into the topic, which is single source of truth. So, Chris, I'm actually going to start with you. Do you want to set the stage and tell the audience what is single source of truth and why it matters?
Yes, Sam, I'd love to start this off. So, single source of truth is we look at information that is critical to our business, and we'll talk about master files, there's transaction files, there's historical data, and there's a lot of non-financial data as well. And so, if you think about where that originates, where it terminates, and being able to understand that business process from inception to completion, that's part of the discussion on single source of truth is who owns the customer master. If there's an argument, the owner wins no matter what. And then there's transactional data and even interpreting that. And where do people go for their analytics and their business intelligence? And if the data is wrong and they make bad decisions, it's a downstream ripple effect of disasters. So being able to validate, reconcile the integrity of that data and say, this is the source of truth because maybe I have the detailed transactions that roll up and substantiate the value. So it's verifiable, reconcilable, as opposed to some summary numbers. If they get screwed up, we're really in trouble. So there's rationalization. It helps you map business processes. It helps you confidently rely on business intelligence so you don't make bad decisions. I mean, those are a couple of the big highlights there. There's certainly a lot more we could talk to, but rationalizing that who owns what, those data flows, firming them up, communicating that so everybody in the business understands where things start because we know there's multiple systems everywhere between ERP, CRM, warehousing, et cetera, et cetera. So hope that's a good start, folks.
Okay, amazing. So great insights there. And I am probably going to have a clarifying question there. So obviously there are a lot of different themes in terms of the benefits, and you also mentioned that, somebody should own the customer master. I get it. But why it is important to own that? If somebody does not own, what are going to be the implications? Can you touch on those as well?
Yeah, sure. I mean, ambiguity. Okay, so I've got two copies. Which one's right? Which one's wrong? Where did I send the invoice? I didn't get my money. So the ripple effect of bad information. Again, if I'm sending the customer bad information, it reflects on me. It's a poor customer experience. The inaccuracies, again, they perpetuate more inaccuracies, and then now we're fixing things. And we don't know what to fix. We fixed the wrong thing. So this ambiguous situation, it spirals out of control. And actually the cost of ambiguity, it delays decision making and it impacts it. So that's still my spin on that. Make sense?
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for that insight, Chris. So now I'm actually going to move to Andy. Andy, from your perspective, why is single source of truth important? And let's say if I am managing two different applications. Let's say I have my CRM and I have my ERP, and I am actually going to go with Chris's example where I have customers in two different systems. As a business executive, I am super confused. I have no clue who should be owning the customer data. My sales team is going to fight it out that, I am the customer owner, so I should be owning. My ERP team is going to fight it out that, finance is what matters in the company. Okay, finance should be controlling it. So in your opinion, number one, why single source of truth matters, and in this scenario, what are the implications if you have customer at two places?
Sure, but first thing I want to say, Sam, is that I am a salesman, so we all know that the salesman's version of the truth is the correct one.
I was actually hoping to have Aaron here, to be honest, today. Aaron Spool is a CFO. He is not here because of the storm. We would have had fun conversation between sales and finance.
The example you suggested, Sam, was ERP versus CRM. But if you don't mind, I'm gonna discuss or mention a little different angle first, because a lot of companies have standalone accounting systems, and then they bolt on something onto the side, like an MRP system or a CRM system, whatever it is. But they bolt all these different silos. And of course, the marketing information they read all said is 100%. They usually use the word interface. And that's usually the key word, because they don't ever say integrate. They'll say, oh, yeah, we interface 100% to that product. That sounds like a completely crazy statement. But the point is that what is the value of having a single source of truth in accounting and in the ERP? I deal with manufacturers as well, as you all know. And manufacturers have things called work orders out on the shop floor. And they're collecting costs against those work orders. For example, job costs, labor costs, machine costs, whatever else. Well, that information in an integrated single source of truth should be the same data that's in the accounting system. But when you've got two separate systems, that interface isn't always 100%. Sometimes you're actually putting manual journal entries into the accounting system, which, of course, every time you do duplicate entry, you're increasing the chance of errors. But the point about single source of truth is that if the accounting people say that job cost $100, and if manufacturing is saying that job costs $150, we better figure out which one is right, or how are we going to be able to continue like that?
Yeah, so great example there. So I'm actually going to have a clarifying question for you as well, Andy. So you mentioned that, people don't like to refer them as the integration. They call themselves as interfacing with the systems, and I don't care what it is. I mean, for me, if it is a, add-on, bolt-on, it is add-on, bolt-on, right? There are going to be too many problems because exactly. So I like to look at the code ownership when I look at the add-on and bolt-on, and when it comes to code ownership, that's where you are going to get a lot more issues, because you have two different teams that are actually managing. You have support issues, but then if you are also going to have the single source of truth issues, where you are going to have duplicate data related to your customers, obviously you are going to get a lot of challenges. So in this particular case, I'm not entirely clear. Let's say if you have the bolt-on, and let's say if these bolt-ons are not really implemented the way they should be implemented, considering the single source of authority, in generally, even though, Andy, you are going to say that you are a sales guy and you are going to be biased to CRM, but typically ERP wins in the enterprise architecture.
Absolutely.
Finance wins. So in this particular case, what issues are we going to get, let's say, if you don't maintain the single source of truth in case of your add-on situation?
Well, I used the accounting system, the costing portion of the accounting system as the example. I could have said a CRM, same thing, whatever the bolt-on is. If the integration isn't 100%, which it rarely is when you have two products that are interfaced together, they're always interfaced at specific points in your system. So whenever it wasn't that way originally, the integration is usually not perfect. So if it's not perfect, you're going to have labor transactions in the job on the shop floor, which manufacturing is going to know everything about that. But when you transfer it back over to the accounting system, not being the same, they're going to be making decisions from the accounting perspective with different data, with different information. Now, if you have a fully integrated system, one single source of the truth is pretty simple, because it's all fully integrated and updated real time throughout the entire system. Same thing as in the CRM. If you have a bolt-on CRM, how much of that data of the customer file in the ERP is being transformed over to the CRM, and how much you have to manually transfer yourself? Fully integrated, it's all one entry, one update, real time.
Yeah, Andy, as I hear your story, I mean, if you think about shared source of truth, because frankly, what I started saying is, can I take the detail and roll it up and substantiate the value? Accounting can't do that in your context. In your context, the actual owner of the truth of the cost of the work order is really in the detailed collection system, right? Because I can substantiate it, and then accounting
integrated into the full.
I agree, but even integrated, a lot of times we only pass a summary value, which means even in that context, the summary value accounting has to reconcile to your detailed subledger. frankly.
And then it
Even
rounds
in
up
most
or rounds
ERP
down.
systems, the GL has to reconcile to the subledgers because the GL doesn't have the detail to substantiate
Exactly.
that. And I think
Yeah.
even in the CRM example, okay, maybe accounting owns the customer master, but CRM may own all the contacts because the accounting system doesn't keep all the contacts. So there's some could be shared, but I just wanted to add that detail to your comments.
No, I absolutely agree.
Some interesting insights there. So I want to actually move to Chuck. Chuck, what is single source of truth in your opinion? Do you agree with what has been said so far? Do you have anything to add from the single source of truth perspective, the definition?
I do, honestly. The single source of truth, first of all, it's a great study in sociology. I think it's a perfect it's perfect analysis of the human condition. Single source of truth is what I view. Okay, translate that into data. We talk about the customer master. Salespeople are terrible at updating the customer master. They're just notoriously terrible at having good data. And the operations folks, they're very myopic as well. They only enter the bare minimum of what they need, not recognizing that it doesn't necessarily translate back. In that sense, a disparate system, a bolt on system, can actually be helpful. Okay. Because according to the people, there are two sources of truth, but that's a tremendous trade off. The tremendous trade off is that sales doesn't know what sales doesn't know. Operations doesn't know what operations doesn't know. And you maintain this siloed view of truth. And so truly, the source of truth in multiple data sets is only as good as the process of the handoff. It's about how well the people work together, how well the people can empathize and recognize that what I'm doing is to be reused and that someone else has to be able to create value from what I do. And it's that becomes the measure of the source of truth. But we're talking about two data sets, and there's always going to be some discontinuity, and folks just don't focus on that.
Okay, amazing insights there, Chuck. Thank you so much for that. Jeff, what are your thoughts overall? Do you agree with the definition of single source of truth? Do you have any specific examples where you may have seen challenges because of single source of truth not being maintained across the applications?
Yeah, well, I'm a story guy, so I can start with the story. I know when I walk into a business, and usually we, as you know, we sell warehouse management systems, and so we're always the second or third or fourth guy to the party. There's already players there, and so when we come with our system, we have to play nice. And how we start is we start by observing, and we start observing key processes. And in one situation, we start working with a meat manufacturer, and they have problems with their inventory, AAA, AA meats, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the order entry person had a process that she would receive all the orders from the salespeople, and at 12 noon, they would go into the system. And everybody thought there was something with the system that wouldn't allow her to enter the orders until 12 noon. So I went up to the seer and said, "What's up with your system?" And she goes, "Well, what happens is we get the orders from the salespeople by 9 or 10 o'clock. I put them into the system, or I look at them in the system. I see what inventory is available. And then at 12 noon, I put on my ski jacket and I go downstairs into the freezer and into the fridge and actually count everything." That's her single source of truth. Amazing, isn't it? It's not what's in the speed or in the WMS. She goes out there. So I said, how can we improve that so you don't have to walk down there all the time? So we work backwards from there. And so the WMS that we provide will actually improve that single source of truth that's in her system. If we can't improve it, then we push that single source of truth to our system, right? And that's where you have to understand how to integrate, how to play nice. And often there's also politics involved.
Yeah.
I tried to replace a certain accounting report a couple of weeks ago, and they used this accounting report to invoice. And I said, you know what? We can automate this report. You don't have to print it out. I can push out. And they said, no. So that accounting report was their single source of truth. So what we get comfortable with is the notion is that, yes, there are single sources of truth, but there are multiple single sources of truth. And each one gives a potential political landmine. And it's a question of how you handle it and how you actually make it better. Because that's the key to a good system, is that It makes the existing single sources of truth better, or you replace the ones like the ski jacket down to the meat locker and give her something better to do, better way to validate. So I approach it from a very practical viewpoint at a high level, and then we work down from there and figure out how do we move that data from the originating source, in this case, maybe a scan receive or a scan pick, and actually improve the system that and the people who are relying on that data so they can make better decisions in real time and with fewer issues. So it's all about creating that confidence and creating that common handbook, if you want to call it, where everybody is working from the same page.
Okay, so love the story, by the way. That's a fascinating story. And, one of the comments that you mentioned related to politics, technology is always going to be the easiest part. Politics is always harder in every single engagement that I have personally worked in. Okay, and this conversation is going to be slightly more political as well because we have the salespeople, we have the finance people. In the guest, we have manufacturing folks, and when you talk to each of these, they are all sort of trying to control as much as possible. If you go to my Industry 4.0 community, they are going to say that, you know what, OT should be the control owner. Okay, if you go to finance, finance is going to say finance should be the control owner. If you go to procurement, procurement is going to say I should be controlling. Okay, and sales, obviously, you have seen Andy's here. They always want to control. So it's a big challenge. So let's get one thing cleared overall from the data set perspective. I think I could hear a lot of different themes. But one of the things, based on my understanding of source of truth, is we have 2 or 3 different data sets when you look at the business data. Number one is going to be your master data. Master data is always going to be more critical than your transactional data. Okay, so I don't know if anybody is going to have required understanding of what master data is and what transactional data is. But typically, from my experience, when we look at source of truth, it is really going to be master data. For example, Chuck actually mentioned the comment that it is the customer master or the vendor master or the item master or your pricing sheets. Those are going to be relevant for the single source of truth. There's also one comment that actually came from one of the podcast episodes that I had done, and she used the term called worm. Okay, and this is a very old term. So it's called WORM. It's called write once, read multiple times. This is the basic software architecture principle, in my opinion. That's what they used to teach back in the days when we used to write software. In my opinion, in case of source of truth, the write once, read multiple times is extremely important, and that's how enterprise architecture should be designed. Okay, when you use 2 systems, when you are using bolt-ons on top of a ERP, then you are writing in 2 different databases. Okay, you might be reading multiple times, nobody cares for that, but you are writing 2 times. When you write 2 times, you are going to get tons and tons and tons of issues from the database perspective. So I'm actually gonna go back to you, Chris. Do you agree with that? Whatever I said so far. Do you disagree? Do you have any stories that you might be able to share related to this?
Sure. Write once, read many. Yeah, sure. But we use a term, it's called replication. And so we do replicate data. And the data is typically replicated from the source of the truth downstream. So that is very common because those subsidiary systems actually need the data in that place. So you're really not going to get away from replication, but it's fully integrated. And I think in that perspective, that decisions on who owns the truth stipulates integration flow and override update type rules, but its replication is really what the terminology is. So I don't think you're going to have a write once situation in multi-system models. It's just to that point. But again, as you go back to you talk about master files, I'll come back to transaction files because it still goes back to where's the detail. And the subledger, and we call all these other systems, are all considered subledgers and in a transactional to the financial system, wherever they may be, but they're all lots of subledgers. ERP, CRM, CAD, warehouse management, e-commerce. Even e-commerce is a subledger. Where's the detail? It's in the e-commerce system. A lot of times I don't bring everything into my ERP. So just a couple clarifying comments. But again, I think there's a couple premises, but that replication, and even we replicate transactional data. We replicate from our ERP all of the project, all the actuals. It all ends up in CRM so that we've created that customer experience there. And I think that's the other part of understanding subsidiary systems and replicating data is where's the user experience need to be? You might think Power BI replication. Well, moving it up into an Azure data warehouse, we're replicating it again, but we're creating a different capability and user experience there. So those aren't negatives. They're not negatives, but the control and those decisions around process and data flow supports integrations. It supports where do I reconcile, override comes from where. So it supports all that decision making without questions at that point in time when it occurs.
So you are right, to be honest. I mean, the way I like to think about this is when you think of replication, you are still relying on one source data, even though you are maintaining two states, but they are being synced, they are being replicated. I get it. But still, you have one source of truth. So yes, there is a subtle difference between, if you go like, okay, I'm saying right once, meaning it should be right once. I mean, yes, I get it. But replication is still, in my opinion, it's still very single source of truth. So I agree with whatever you have said so far. Thank you so much, Chris, for those clarifications. Andy, what about you? Do you agree with this assessment? Do you see any challenges in the architecture that Chris has mentioned related to replication? Replication is going to be needed. If you need the data at the location of the system, obviously you would need that. And even if you look at the MDM model, in case of MDM, sometimes you have to bring that data to the destination system just to make sure that you have some sort of real-time data. If you are going to include MDM in every single transaction, sometimes what we have seen is the transaction itself is going to take, let's say, I don't know, 2 minutes, and then you are done because you cannot really process those business transactions, right? So even in that case, I think replication is going to be super, super, super handy. So Andy, in your opinion, what do you think so far? Do you agree with the definition of the data that master data is the one that we are talking about when it comes to a single source of truth? And do you agree with the replication and write once, read multiple times?
First off, I'd never disagree with Chris. He's the brains. I'm only the good looks. Anyways, the comment that you made a few minutes ago, Sam, about two separate databases, I think that's what's really critical. And maybe there are technologies that can simulate the data from one into another fairly good. But the reality is that whenever you get an ERP system or some kind of a multifunctional system, it always had some DNA at the original development of how that system was supposed to be used and how it is integrated. And I find unless you're getting one single system that was meant to be integrated from the beginning, no matter what you add on, you're never going to get that same clean integration as you would have. And, I'm sure there are replication tools that can be pretty darn good, but Chris is a lot smarter than I am.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I don't think Chris is going to disagree, and Chris, you can always, chime in.
No, it's not always replication. To your point, you're integrating data, and you're right. If it's not out of the box integrated, it's a brute force approach, and you're going to miss things, and it's going to evolve. And we got a problem later. We missed that field. We didn't know we had to fill that in. You're right. There's a huge risk there. You're right, Andy. There's no question about it. And I'm lucky. I sell fully integrated out of the box. So normally we're integrating with these subsidiary systems to that.
Sure, I get it.
I know that. In the different scale of systems, there's a lot of bolt-ons that don't come out of the box, but you need to integrate them. To your point, replication was more over a CRM where we're just downstream pushing data into a different system.
Sure. So, in regards to the integration of multiple databases, again, they're always going to say, yes, it's no problem. Yes, it's 100%. Yeah, it's a piece of cake. The point is they're integrating at certain data points between the two systems. It's never going to be fully integrated. It cannot be. As a matter of fact, it might be so. I'm not pointing out any systems, but some are so bad that you cannot have a single source of truth. It's just as simple as that.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for those insights, Andy. Chuck, I'm actually going to move to you. So what do you think so far? Do you agree with the assessment of the data set that we agreed that, this is probably going to be the items that are going to be good candidates for the single source of truth? Do you see any issues with respect to replication? Do you agree with the definition of worm?
Well, I agree with the concept of worm. I see a lot of issues with replication. First and foremost, the companion system may simply not have the capability to understand the data that's coming from what would be the master system, if you will. It simply doesn't have the capability. Inventory data, for instance. So we can replicate all day long, but if the CRM doesn't have the capability to understand that, which then would guide the decision making and create inferences and promises to customers, you're going to have a big problem. So replication isn't really much of a solution. Additionally, how many companies don't actually follow through with robust replication? They stop, and replication doesn't happen at all. It may be for budgetary purposes, it may be for fear, it may be for lack of understanding, it could be any number of things that you've all experienced many times, I'm sure. So, replication is a wonderful concept, and I believe in it fully. It's just that, once again, it's subject to the human condition. Why do we stop? And then also, why have we chosen, or what tool have we chosen to be the companion system? So you're still going to end up with these disparate sources of truth and these siloed versions of the truth.
Yeah.
And when I get back to the customers, those salespeople will absolutely positively make promises, won't they, Andy? Okay. Probably unwittingly. Okay. They're not bad sales. They don't know.
I said Scout's owner, by the way, Chris.
And consequently, you have an unhappy customer because someone had a different version of the truth.
Yeah,
or a different perception of the truth. Because that salesman wasn't necessarily lying. He was just coding it a little bit. He wasn't telling you the absolute truth, right?
And replication is not everything necessarily, Chuck. Specific data sets. So it wasn't, I'm going to duplicate everything. That's not conceivable, but if that makes sense.
Okay, Jeff, you unmuted yourself. I just want to make sure, do you have comment? Are you waiting for my question? Go ahead, please.
Sure. I mean, there's really two levels of integration that we've talked about so far. One is when you're actually creating a separate standalone database outside of, say, the ERP, and then you're going to transact on that separate database and then somehow push the data to update the ERP so everybody is more or less on the same page. Then the other way of integration is to actually write directly to the ERP tables or to the master data. And hopefully the ERP has a good API that can support, in our case, mobile workers, and that we can transact on a volume basis very efficiently. And if there's any issues with rollback, that's handled in the API as well. So we prefer to use the ERP's API because we believe in one database. And when there's one database, you can have you can now push out the data more reliably to the guys on the floor. And when they're updating the same database, that pretty much whoever's relying on that data will be able to continue to make decisions, but in a faster, more accurate manner. So basically, I mean, to everybody's point, replication is a very dangerous thing, and you got to approach it very carefully because you got to understand as to who's going to actually hold the details related to that second replicated data. So, for example, when we have our second database, we have to decide, at least as far as inventory is concerned, do we keep the details of where the product is from a location viewpoint in the WMS and also share it with the ERP, or do we just push the total quantities of the inventory to the ERP? And then the details of the location and the bin locations where that product is actually kept in WMS. So we're basically forcing people to say, if you want to know where product is, go to the WMS. But if you want just a quantity verification, that's fine. Use the ERP. So it's putting down those rules and that everybody plays according to those rules and doesn't expect more than the replication can deliver.
Go ahead, Jack. You had a comment.
Yeah, and Jeff, you're 1,000% right. The one exception I would concern me is in the event of a manufacturing organization where the manufacturing shop floor may not be playing in WMS, and the location of certain inventory data may be important. Now you can have multiple warehouses in your architecture and your data set, and that might alleviate those types of things. But at some point, that's my only concern is for in that manufacturing scenario that they crucially need to know where the parts are, just in case things are lost, not fed in time, that sort of thing. You need to track down lost parts because once again, there's a customer on the other end.
Sure, absolutely, and the lookup for that inventory should be on the WMS or where the details around the location of those parts are. And ideally, you'll have actually more detail on those parts. You'll have lot numbers, traceability, and you'll even direct them to pick on a FIFO, first in, first out basis, that kind of thing. So it all goes to, who can best support the user and creating those SSOTs in the areas where, in the places where they'll best serve the user, basically. If it's just a basic inventory report showing totals, then absolutely go with the ERP. And if you're okay with the time delay, that's great. But if you want real-time data to be able to pick for manufacturing or pick customers, then you got to go to the source.
So, Chris, you had a comment. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think just back to the comment, because Jeff, most WMSs that I've seen, either you're built for a specific ERP where you rely on the ERP product master, or you have your own product master in your system, correct? And you replicate the item master from the ERP into your product master, which has more data elements, but that's a replication. What do you call that? Integrating, replicating? Let's just make sure we don't misinterpret that. But that would be an example where your product master the single source truth? Well, for certain attributes, maybe a new product development, it starts in the ERP. Then it ends up in the WMS item master. But that's still, the ERP is the single source of truth on the product master, even though you have a replicated product master that has more attributes, for example. So,
well, we approach it a little differently, Chris. We actually use the product master in the ERP.
Okay, so if you're built for specific, or you've built that integration to multiple ERPs, a lot of people come in agnostic, and again, they're linking them together to kind of replicate data back.
Yeah, we'll augment the existing product master. So, for example, if there's a data point that's missing in the existing product master, we'll add our own fields to it, and then supplement what the ERP might be missing.
Sure. If they don't have a WMS, I would expect the ERP doesn't have most of the attributes you need to drive warehouse management. So, good stuff.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, Jeff, I want to make sure that listeners are able to follow along. So let's say you have the product master in the ERP, and obviously if you are going to add more data fields for your warehouse, obviously you are going to be the source of truth, because that information does not exist in ERP, right? So are you saying that, if I need, let's say, for example, when we talk about WMS is a different beast from your ERP, because you require so much data, so many details. For example, you are not going to have a square footage in ERP. You are not going to have, let's say, if you are doing any sort of integration with robotics, you are not going to have all of that in ERP. ERP systems are not really designed for that. So you have very WMS specific information. Obviously, the WMS should be the source of truth for that, because ERP does not even understand those fields. So when you are, let's say, overlaying these fields on top of WMS becomes the source of truth. But let's say if you are reutilizing some of the fields from your ERP should still be the source of truth. Are we aligned here or not?
Yeah, we are. We're both. Sorry to make it confusing, but we'll take, for example, the part number from the ERP, right? And we'll take its unit measurement of eaches, but we'll add, for example, how many of those eaches fit on a pallet. So when we go to direct a pick, we know how many actual pieces fit on that pallet. That information as to how many pieces fit on a pallet may not be in the ERP. So on one hand, we're pulling the part number and the unit measurement from the ERP. And then when we go to pick, we know how much we can fit on a pallet or in a box. And that information is in our system. Likewise, we know, for example, how much material can fit in a particular bin or pallet location. Again, that's in the WMS and not in the ERP. So we're always augmenting and working with the ERP. Now, there's the interesting truth about ERPs is that a lot of them weren't made to manage inventory, right? In fact, they view inventory on a transactional level. And so there's always this tension between manufacturing efficiency and proper inventory management. I'll give you an example. A lot of systems, ERP manufacturing systems, use this process called auto issue and backflush. You do work order receipt, and automatically that triggers a finished goods receipt. And all the raw materials get issued as well with that, right? Now, what happens when the actual standard of issuing is off by a little bit, say 1 or 2%, and that backflush happens continually? Eventually, your inventory accuracy starts going off. And that's where you need to do things like a cycle count of those parts to ensure it's accurate. But it's all these automated functions that actually start throwing off inventory, and you have to understand how that ERP thinks, and then to augment or supplement those blind sides that is designed to ensure manufacturing and production efficiency with your WMS processes, right? So it's learning to play nice and actually making the ERP better. And everything's, wow, this ERP system is fantastic, but it's the WMS helping it be better, playing nice.
Well, I think that one of the things that goes back to something I had thought about earlier, and that is that in my mind, the failure is usually in the feedback loop. And if the source of truth is really heavily skewed by that cooperation, if folks aren't going back and adjusting based on yield loss, based on inventory damage, based on incorrect data, so I'm assuming that I'm using 1.2 feet, and in general, and I'm actuality I'm using 1.25 feet. Okay, and that's going to adjust over time. The data is not static. That feedback loop is a huge source of that error, and that's why you so often have that siloed source of truth between manufacturing and inventory, is because the feedback loop failed. Nobody is updating that information, which, by the way, manufacturing is the one who gets their nose out of joint, but they're the ones who actually know what the outcome and that effect on inventory is based on their usage and their consumption. So it still so often comes back to being swayed by the effectiveness of the process and the handoff.
I don't mean to dominate, but guess what the most common under practice thing done on the manufacturing floor is, and it's what we call an issue return. They'll bring a batch of materials to the floor, build, and then have 10 or 5 pieces left, and they'll just leave it on the floor. As far as the work order, as far as the ERP is concerned, all those materials have been consumed. So
that way they have it for later, right?
That's right. Well, what they
private
do
stash.
They own private stock, right? I walk around in facilities and I see all these pieces of metal lying under the machine. The thing goes, oh, that's just excess piece. We'll use it on the next job. I go, does anybody know about this? They go, no. We'll get around to recording it. So what happens is you have all these little like squirrel type storage of nuts and everything all over the facility, and that's where your inventory gain becomes often, to your point, Chuck. That's where there is no feedback loop, so to speak, other than everybody thinks they're consuming exactly the exact amount according to the engineering masters.
Steel's not expensive, is it, Jeff?
Not at all these days.
Chris, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Well, we need Aaron, because the CFO would be the guy saying, "Hey, I'm hitting all this variance when I get a physical inventory." And so again, in the back flush, just a little off, but you don't get you're doing macro variance analysis, which means you see it on the P&L. You don't know where the problem was on the shop floor. And I think to your point, Jeff is right. Data collection, where you're issuing material, return issues. Oh, I dropped some, I spilled some. Let's put some more in. Scrap. And again, to your point, Chuck, is you need the data. And again, now manufacturing subledger, you need the detail to make the feedback loop in the process. CFO sees $1 million in inventory adjustment. He has no clue what to fix. Macro variance, you got to go micro. So yes, totally support what you guys are talking about.
Okay, so guys, I'm actually going to build onto what Chuck and Jeff has been saying. So I understand that you all need to augment your product master because obviously you need to. There's only one thing consistent about ERP is nobody likes ERP. Okay, that's what I always hear. Okay, so I get it. So now my e-commerce team is here. They are actually going to augment product master in their way because they don't like ERP product master. Because the way marketing thinks is very different from the finance and operations, right? They are going to manipulate that product master in the language of SEO, in the language of the way the Google likes to think. You are, doing this more from your warehouse perspective. My Industry 4.0 guy is gonna come, and they are going to manipulate the product master that from their perspective, because they are just thinking from their perspective. And now, if you don't have that feedback loop coming from all of these directions, now you can see the kind of problems you are going to get, the kind of variances you are going to get. And my CFO is going to get confused, okay, where the money is. Okay, so that's why, I mean, I completely get that, sometimes you definitely have to augment the product master when the real need is going to be there. But that should not be the practice that, you augmented you created a new product master in your WMS, or you created a new product master in your e-commerce. So what do you think of this, guys? Let me see. Have you seen this in common practice? When you go to implementation, especially I have seen, you know what? And I'm actually going back to the comment related to politics. And sometimes this is going to be the case where, you know what? Marketing does not even talk to finance. And since they know that their job is not going to be done, because if they spoke to finance, finance is not going to agree. So what they are going to do is they are going to bloat the hell out of e-commerce system, and then you run into so many different issues. This happens in the warehouse as well. So I don't know, Chris, do you have similar experience in terms of what I'm seeing?
Absolutely. And I've got a couple of Shopify integrated clients, and you're right. Actually, these guys ran down the road and started creating the product master. We said, the item numbers need to match what's in the ERP. They're like, oh. And so they're new SKUs, new descriptions, pricing. And again, so SKUs were a problem. And then we say, guys, we need consistent unit of measures in pricing as well. Again, this common language, right, guys? And what kind of loops do you have? And again, we go back to the customers in the e-commerce system. We've got a group that's doing HSN. They don't bring in every person that buys whatever they're selling. They bring in HSN as a customer and they drop the details on the sales order. But boy, there's a lot of truth that's in the e-com sites. But you're right. Product Master is a great example, and they're fighting over it. So,
okay, Jeff, you had a comment, sorry?
Yeah, I mean, to Chris's point, I mean, there's some little known features in ERPs that you can leverage. Like, for example, Andy could speak to this as well. Visual has this feature called part alias. And what part alias does, it allows you to use a third-party barcode and number and cross-reference it to your own internal part number. So if you run into those situations where you're buying product, your distributor, and it's coming in with UPC codes, which obviously don't match up with your internal system, see if your ERP has part alias. Set it up in your ERP, and then your WMS, when you scan that UPCA code, should translate and become your internal part number. That's one way of addressing these different part master file differences. But ultimately, e-commerce is totally changing the way warehouses work. It's scaring the crap out of warehouse managers because they're now going from picking cases and pallets to eaches. And if you can imagine, that's a totally different process. And I'll let Chuck speak to that, but it's totally changing the order size. It's totally changing their KPIs. They're going from picking, many lines to fewer lines with smaller volumes. So trying to change your warehouse to support that is very, very challenging right now for a lot of warehouse operators.
Yeah, and one of the biggest things that have to change is their mindset in terms of picking flow. So we think about our human organization system is that I'm going to pick an order. Well, that order is incredibly inefficient. A wave pick where you have multiple interspersed items where you're minimizing your movement of the person, okay, to be able to maximize the output of the picking as we accommodate the eaches. The small quantity and large number of item orders becomes crucial. And that little mistake creates a tremendous blowback from a customer. And if I'm a warehouse manager, I'm afraid of that too, because the customer dissatisfaction, they become more like the consumer rather than the business, where it came in blue and I wanted red and I'm just infuriated. Not I'm slowed down. The mistake is small, keep them small, fix them fast. So they have right, but it's a completely and total different product or production flow or output flow by switching to such a large number of items. You have to completely rework your warehouse. I was doing a walkthrough literally this week with a customer who was switching from order picking to wave picking. And it's going to be quite the adjustment for them.
Okay, amazing, guys. So obviously, we want to talk about some of these solutions as well. So as one of the solutions that Ashish actually pointed out that, it's going to be related to your MDM. I have seen a lot of MDM implementations as well. They typically slow the heck out of the system, to be honest. So yes, MDM is one of the solutions, but I don't know if that is the ideal solution. Obviously, there are going to be pros and cons with that approach as well. So now I am looking for some sort of, governance, either from the policy perspective or from the system perspective. So let's say we all understand that, e-commerce is the king. They need to drive, they need to augment our product master. WMS is also the king. Okay, they need to augment our product. Everybody is king. Okay, they need to augment our product master, vendor master, customer master. But what are some of the policies that we can have so that we have controlled change in the system, as opposed to this over bloated nightmare inside your e-commerce system or WMS system, just because people may not understand what is happening on the other side of the table. So, what are some of the practices that you have seen? I'm actually going to start with you, Andy, because you have not spoken for some time. So, from your experience, what have you seen in terms of the policies, practices, systems to be able to control the changes to your master data and to maintain the single source of truth across your enterprise architecture?
Well, years ago, I was the president of the Vancouver chapter of Apex. And when I lived in Utah, I was on the board of directors for all the Western states. And in regards to all these practices and policies, I think it has a lot to do with education and training. Because if you know and you understand what the accuracy of your input and how that's impacting the rest of the company, it's more likely you're going to be more efficient and more care about what you're putting in. So, in a short answer, I say it requires more discipline and more training and more education.
Yeah, so I completely agree that the education has to be there, but before that, we have to have some sort of structure so that we can educate in the structured manner. So I was actually looking for the structure. I don't know what you guys have seen from your experience in setting up these policies or the systems. So I'm actually going to move to Chuck next because he has spoken the least today, and I want to make sure that everybody is able to speak as much. So, okay, Chuck, what is your experience in terms of setting the policies or systems in creating the architecture so that we have controlled source of truth is how I'm going to define now.
Well, I think that going back to the e-commerce example, which I love, because the e-commerce customer or the e-commerce data input oftentimes comes out of a little bit of laziness and poor understanding because it's set up by folks who don't really understand the operational impact. So they, by way of a simple example, they go and they put all kinds of information into the description. Yes, it's a very SKU oriented thinking. Yes, clearly this part is blue, it's red. But truth be told, the definition of what the SKU actually is in the bill of material and the manufacturing instructions. It has nothing to do with the description. So in terms of a policy that I like is understand what the least common denominator is and simplify for a SKU by way of example. Honestly, manufacturing doesn't need to know that thing is other than a widget. They don't need to know anything about it. But in your e-commerce system, you may want one part number with multiple attributes.
Yep.
You and I know that translates into multiple SKUs so that the warehouse can pick that one part and get the red one and not the blue one. So an understanding organizationally of what that least common denominator is. And honestly, someone has to own that source of truth of this is the least common denominator. And I'm probably the arbiter of what that is, the enforcer, if you will. Say, okay, yes, keep that in your e-commerce system. Keep that in your CRM system. Keep that in your WMS system. I don't know who that is. Is it finance, as you say, whoever it is, but it really has to be one person. And I think, but someone has to be responsible for scraping that data and maintaining that data. And that's really probably what it comes down to. If you have that kind of maintenance at that base level, okay, that enforcement of that, then it pushes everyone into better practices.
Okay, amazing. So I definitely agree overall. So Andy mentioned that, the education needs to be there. Of course, without education, you are not going to have compliance. Everybody needs to understand the value of it. So that is very important part. Chuck, you are absolutely right that the ownership of each of the data needs to be there. But then we get into the politics because everybody's sort of fighting for the pie that whoever controls, they are probably going to have a lot more power in the organization. So we need to come up with some sort of, best practices. Okay.
But it's going to.
So that my CEO can figure out, what, this is what industry does. Sales should win in this game or finance should win because they are struggling as well because everybody's sort of fighting. What can a CEO do? Or CFO do for that matter. So, okay. So Jeff, from your perspective, what are some of the best practices in creating the control practices so that, we don't create these multiple sources of truth especially unnecessary ones, not the necessary ones.
Yeah, I mean, it's very important to decide who's going to have the rights to make those changes, right? And it's, ideally one or two people in the facility that can say, add to the part master file. I've seen situations where it was a bit of a free for all, and the part numbers ended up actually getting the description because I was brought in to put in a WMS. I said, that description, that one quarter screw, left bolts, and dash dash space space. I go, we can't barcode that. That's a description. She goes, yeah, I know, but that's the only way we can pick accurately because then that prints out on the pick sheets. So that's it. And they also had multiple versions of the same part. So that's an example when it's a bit of a free for all. Well, it's a free for all. So you limit that to one person. You get only, or one or two people, you give access rights to those people on the system so that they can change the master file. And then you also decide on a format. The best format for a part, from my perspective, is between 5 to 7 digits long. It could be alphanumeric. Avoid fives because they look like S's. Avoid underscores because they're hard to enter. And avoid zeros because they look like O's, right? Other than that, make up a part number, right? Ideally with some description. So basically you have that. And then I actually had a customer who actually created a macro that overlaid on top of their ERP. We didn't do it. And this macro would pop up automatically as soon as you tried to enter a new part number. And what he created is a macro. It's almost like a little spreadsheet. It forced you to enter in the right fields within a certain structure. So I thought that was brilliant. And he then started with that macro, allowed other people to start creating these parts, because often what happens is purchasing guys would buy a part, find out it's no longer available, but then they find another part that the supplier had, and they create a new part on the fly using this macro. So that was the issue there he was trying to solve, is that he had multiple people creating parts, but no one was doing it exactly the same way. And so this macro solved it. So it was actually a nice little solution that he had there. We didn't create it, but it was just something he whipped up. So kudos to him.
All right. Thank you so much, Jeff. So, Chris, I'm actually going to lean back to you. I'm actually trying to create a government here, right? And
Sure.
You need to give me some rules of
I'll
the
be
road.
specific. Let's think about customers and who owns customers. Accounting. Why? Because they've got to go through an onboarding. There's a business process to set up a new customer, right? Hey, we need a credit app. We got to do this. We got to do this. Are they good to go? Here's a credit limit, back to sales, right? So there's a responsibility there. On the product side, product development owns product master. I'm lucky, Microsoft Dynamics, we have workflows that move these processes through, and we have concept of a release product, which means I'm in there doing engineering. It's not released yet. What happens after it's released? So it starts that food chain. And I think in the manufacturing, right, engineering releases and approves bill of materials, right? They can be in a state, but I think there's different process owners, just like the sales manager owns pricing. So those are release points. And if the systems don't have those workflow controls, but there's got to be a process that governs over who is the review point that approves the customer, sets the credit limit, we can sell to them. Who is it that signs up the vendor? Gets the W-9? Do we have all the required documentation? Great. The vendor is active. You can issue a PO. A lot of processes surrounding a lot of those different topics. And I think that's it. There's a process owner, but organizations have to let that governance execute, basically.
Okay, amazing, guys. So we are close to our time now. So now we are going to take our closing advice. So Andy, what is your short closing advice for today?
Whenever anyone asks me this type of question about single source of truth, I always tell them that a fully integrated system will be a single source of truth if it's integrated properly. Whether it's a CRM information that's going to be the same as the customer master, or whether it's going to be like as we described earlier, the job costing on the shop floor versus the costing on the GL entry. If you can't find or you can't afford a full integrated ERP, and you have to go to best of breed and integration of tool, prefer to get something that has using the same database as number one. But after that, I would recommend that you speak to their customers and see how clean the integrations truly are.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for that advice, Andy. Chris, what is your closing advice?
Yeah, quick, as you evaluate source of truth, draw a picture. illustrate your different systems.
Yeah.
Understand where's that subledger that has all the detail, and draw some arrows, and really make sure you don't assume that data points and data flows are going to be there. And I think that's going to help you kind of block and tackle through who really should own information as you overlay your business processes on that. So,
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for that advice, Chris. Chuck, what is your short closing advice?
My short closing advice is let the demand of the market and the customer determine what your system architecture ultimately needs to look like. One of the things that concerns me is that we become slaves to the ERP, and we let ourselves become serialized through a system of approvals, which then leads to having our lead time and our outputs taking way too long because we've created a process that makes us a slave to that. I understand the need for the handoffs, the approvals along the way, but it really needs to start at the end, and it really needs to work backwards. And sometimes that's going to lead you to that bolt-on system.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Chuck, for that advice. Jeff, do you want to have short closing advice, please?
Sure. I mean, start off by playing nice. I mean, realize that you're one of many systems within a very complex environment that has a lot of social, political, and obviously technical issues you need to resolve. So at the end of the day, be prepared to accept multiple sources of truth, but inevitably you have to be able to push the data to the point where you make others a little better at what they do, but ultimately accept the fact that you may not be the only player. And so, learn to get along.
On that note, guys, thank you so much for joining, and thank you so much for your insight.
thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Chuck Coxhead, head over to procensis.com. It's PROCENSIS.com. If you want to learn more about Andy Pradigo, head over to ESSoft.com. It's ESSOFT.com. If you want to learn more about Chris Garardini, head over to turnkeytech.com. It's TURNKEYTEC.com. If you want to learn more about Jeff Lam, head over to portable-intelligence.com. It's portable-intelligence.com. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with John Schechter, who discusses how mobile ASRS systems differ from regular ones. Also, the interview with Rich Said, who describes his journey and the pitfalls of implementing 6 ERP projects throughout his career. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.